Once, when I was in middle school, I made 30 classmates fail because I had found the perfect way to become a millionaire since I started doing homework for hire for 200 pesos. So I became popular, and the next day 30 kids came up to me saying,
"For tomorrow, please."
I mean, by the second day I had made 6,000 pesos, but the problem was I couldn't handle 30 assignments at the same time, so I hired my cousin Tizok, El Panzas, and Sardina as employees, and everything was fine. Until the next day when they turn in the assignments and the teacher picks one up and says, "Which one of you wrote that photosynthesis is when the plant takes pictures of itself?" I had to give the money back, but Tizok had already spent it on chips. One time my teacher Carmelita caught me cheating on a test when I was in middle school, and then she told my parents because I have a mush for brains. And since I hadn't studied, I started writing all the answers on my arms, and that's the worst way to cheat. So then I put on a sweater to cover up. But halfway through the test, the teacher saw me acting suspicious and she says, "Manuelito, isn't it hot in here? Take off that sweater." And I was like,
"No, teacher, it's really cold."
And she looks at me intently and says, "Take it off." And that's when I knew everything was going to go downhill, because she looks at my arms and goes, "I knew it." And I say, "They're tattoos, teacher." But in the end, since the teacher didn't have a car, I drove her home in my parents' truck, and in front of them she says, Manuel, did you have a cheat sheet?" And I was screwed when I got home.
And people only understand through beatings.
Once when I was in kindergarten, the teacher put me against the wall because I talked too much, and to punish me, she made me stand in the corner of the classroom facing the wall. But the teacher didn't realize that I talk non-stop, and I made up imaginary friends so I could keep talking, and the teacher would say to me, "Who are you talking to, kid? There's no one near you anymore." And I would say, "With Miguelito, don't you see him? He said he's going to visit you tonight." And the teacher just sent me back to my seat because she got scared. And the next day she told me, "Because of you, I couldn't sleep all night, kid." Once when I was in elementary school, my notebooks were full of the parrot stamp, and my mom would scold me because I was always talking with my buddies Panzas and Kalaka during class. And the teacher was always like, "Be quiet, you little devils." But since we wouldn't be quiet, Panzas, Kalaka, and I would get the parrot stamp, and they said if we collected 53 of those stamps, we'd be suspended for 3 days. But the good thing is I stopped at 52 stamps, but there was one time they gave me 58 stamps and I got suspended for 3 days. And my mom made me sell bread outside our house, because if I wasn't going to study, she was going to make me work. But the good thing is I earned 1,000 pesos.
A chambear, todos vamos.
One time I flunked at school and my parents punished me as if I had set the classroom on fire. All because, according to the teacher, I didn't send the homework to her email, but honestly I did send it. It's just that instead of putting at gmail.com, I put at gamil.com. So the email went to Narnia and I ended up grounded for a month without even being able to go to the convenience store. And even though I showed them the date, the file, and even cried in front of witnesses, they told me, "You should check before sending, dummy." That's how I learned, but because of the trauma, now I even check if I breathe properly. I don't think this guy is very smart. Once, he didn't want to go to school on the first day of classes because he was really scared. The kind of fear that makes you sweat down to your soul. So, my brilliant plan to avoid going was to pee on my uniform. But the worst part is that my uniform was brand new and shiny. It even smelled glorious. But then my mom started sniffing, sniff, and the crazy lady said to me, "Oh look, you're all set. Ready for your afternoon swimming classes?" And even so, she put me in the car and took me to school. I showed up smelling like a skunk and learned that you don't mess with my mom. What? Are you challenging me? Once when I was in middle school, we had a friend we called Cauliflower who was super dirty because one day my friends and I saw his fingernails and they were really filthy. So, in one of those moments, my buddy El Kalaka asked him, "Hey Cauli, why are your nails always so dirty, man?" And then out of nowhere, without any shame, he tells us all, "Oh, it's because I scratch my butt a lot and I hardly ever shower." And actually, my friend Jorge was eating his breakfast, poor guy, and he was so disgusted that he threw up his ham sandwich. Cauli! And in the end, Cauliflower says, "Let's see if it still smells." Sniff, sniff, and the filthy guy started biting his nails to clean them, according to him, because he said they did smell. Once when I was in the classroom at school, I almost poked a girl's eye out with a box cutter by accident. And the teacher saw me because I was really bored in science class and I was sitting in front of the girl. At that moment, I picked up a damaged box cutter from the table and started playing with it. It broke in half and forcefully flew toward the girl's face. And the girl saw everything in fast motion because she didn't even know what had happened. She just stayed in shock. But since the box cutter crashed against the wall, it made a lot of noise and the teacher wrote me up. One time a friend from school had the ceiling fan fall right on her head. And the school didn't take responsibility. Because that fan looked like a loose tooth and they never sent anyone to fix it. But in one class, the teacher was like, oh, well, the hypotenuse squared plus the bam, and there was a loud bang and we all turned to look. It turned out the fan had fallen on Juanita and they had to take her to the hospital. And they put a neck brace on her. But her parents went to complain to the school and the school, they said that actually she was climbing on the fan and that's why it fell, but that was a big lie. One time, my friend Rekeson had 2 hot Maruchan noodles spill on his leg because we were at recess. So he ran to the cafeteria to get 2 shrimp Maruchan noodles with chili, but then when he was coming back, he was running. Then he tripped and he spilled all the super hot water on his leg. And to make things worse, that day he was wearing shorts. And well, my friends and I saw how his skin was turning white like cheese because of the heat. And the poor guy just kept screaming, ah! And he had to take off his shorts and his boxers and everyone saw his junk. Once when I was 8 years old, my girlfriend Gloria Lamorsa broke up with me because she thought I was weird. One day we were at school talking, but back then when I was in 3rd grade, I used to collect fingernails and colored pencil tips in my pencil case and my backpack. So, Gloria Lamorsa, one day she decided to check right in the compartment of my backpack where I kept those things. And when she saw them, she told me and I said, relax, Gordis. It's a hobby I have, and I want to break the record for the person with the most nails saved. But she looked at me weird and said she'd rather go with Panzas because he wasn't weird. Besides, he shared his hamburgers with her. One time, my friend Panzas knocked over the school's giant Christmas tree with his whole belly and fell right on top of it. He became the overweight Grinch because we were decorating the Christmas tree at school, but Panzas was like, why won't you let me put an ornament on? And we all told him, because you might fall off the ladder. But he said no, so in the end we let him put on just 1 ornament, but then I stopped watching. For a second, I turned around because I was going to the classroom to get the star, but then there was a loud noise throughout the whole school and I turned to look. And it was Panzas on the floor, who had fallen along with the whole Christmas tree and broke everything. Oh, what a fall this bastard took. One time, Chango, who was a friend of my brother, knocked down the school's goalpost and then ran away so he wouldn't get in trouble. And in the end, they gave my poor brother a report. Because that friend, when the teachers weren't around, would climb on top of everything, he even looked like King Kong because one day he climbed onto the school roof and almost fell from the 4th floor. But that day he knocked down the goalpost, they were playing soccer, and since he lost, he climbed onto the goalpost and the guy is really heavy so he knocked it down. Then there was a loud bang throughout the whole school, it even echoed. And while Chango ran away, my brother just stood there in front of the goalpost. A teacher sees him standing there and tells him to go to the principal's office, kid. Once when I was a teenager and went to high school, they called me Nescafe because I was covered in nothing but pimples. And before I turned 15, I had a face as smooth as a baby's bottom, but after a while they started to appear. Not just pimples, but volcanoes erupting all over my face. Because my whole family has oily skin, and that makes acne breaks out more easily on your face. At school, we often gave each other nicknames, so one day I was just joking around with my friends. They called me Nescafe, but I didn't understand why, and I thought it was because I was good in the morning, but that wasn't the reason. The good thing is that I'm not going to wilt like a little plant so quickly. Let's go.
Well, the toxic environment throws itself out and just cuts off, eh?
Once, a crazy teacher in elementary school used to insult me and the whole class because, according to her, we behaved badly. So every time we did something she didn't like, she would say, "You're a bunch of loafers." And honestly, all my classmates and I, who were between 10 and 11 years old, had no idea what a loafer was. Until one day, my buddy Simba looked up what it was. And he answered the teacher right in front of the whole class, "Well, you're a tick." The whole class and I started laughing at what he said, and the teacher felt so offended that she started to cry. The dummy. Oh my god, this is going to be epic, guys. One time, my dad embarrassed me at school when I was 7 years old because my mom had gone on a trip, so my dad had to take care of me. But from the very first day, which was Monday, he messed up and sent me to school. He got me ready however he could, without my Tarzan underwear, with a super exotic hairstyle, pants that weren't even part of the uniform, and my shirt inside out. So in one of those moments, just as classes were about to start, the teacher saw me and said, "Your dad brought you to school, right?" And I was like, "Yes, how did you know?" And in the end, they sent a note to my parents that said, "Parents, this is a school, not a circus. Please send the child properly dressed." When my mom returned from her trip, she told my dad he was being silly. One time, I almost blinded my friend El Panzas because I brought a green laser to school that I had bought at the fair. So I told Panzas, "Look, dude, this laser is really powerful," and he says to me, "How much will you give me if you point it at my eye?" And I was like, "What's up with this guy?" And I told him, "Panzas, if you want money, just ask for it." And he said no, because he didn't beg. Then he said, "If you give me 100 bucks, I'll let you point it at my eye." And well, I was a kid, so I said okay, but Panzas wore glasses, so the beam was even stronger, and I pointed it at him, but in the end. Later, he told me he saw a black spot in the center of his eye for more than a week. One time, when I was 7 years old, I made my brother, the chimpanzee, cry in front of all his classmates at the university, and I embarrassed him because he and his classmates had done a project to make a game, and everyone brought their little brother or cousin to school to rate it. So all the kids started playing the games, and at the end, we had to vote for the one we liked the most. But I didn't vote for my brother's game. I voted for another guy's game, which was cooler, and then he asked me, "You voted for mine, right?" And I said, "No." Then he started crying and throwing a tantrum in front of his friends because he felt betrayed. The disappointment, the betrayal, my friend. One time when I was in middle school, I peed in my brand new school uniform on the first day of classes because I didn't want to go. And my dad gave me a beating because I had been on vacation for almost 2 months straight. So my body had already gotten used to being lazy, and I liked spending all night playing. So one night before Monday, I said, I have to go to school tomorrow. What a drag. I think I'm gonna pee my pants so I don't have to go. So that's what I did. But it didn't turn out like I expected, because even so, my dad sent me to school beat up and soaked in pee. FF, you're a huge asshole. One time as a joke, I smacked him in the family jewels with just the shadow of my shoe. To my friend El Panzas, it made him feel like throwing up his balls through his mouth. Because then my friend El Kalaka and I used to mess with El Panzas a lot because his reactions made us laugh. But one day I was bored in science class. So without thinking, I grabbed my shoe and all bold and daring, take it off. I see El Panzas standing there and I hit him in the balls with my shoe, so he stood there for like 2 seconds, frozen, and then he started freaking out. Dude, did you go too far this time? Yeah, did you? Me, I was scared the teacher would come, so I told him, be quiet, don't let them hear you. And honestly, poor El Panzas, he can really take a hit. Once I felt like the smartest man in the world for finishing my math exam. I finished it in 10 minutes because it was Monday at 8 in the morning and the exam lasted about 2 hours. But I had answered it in just 10 minutes. And as far as I was concerned, I had done everything right. But then 2 days later, when they handed out the results, the teacher came and said, "I'm going to give the results in roster order." And since I was always the first one, he goes and says, "Manuel Aguilar, you got a 1.8, and I just made this face. One time I got a 1.3 on an exam because I didn't understand a thing in class. But so I wouldn't look dumb, I nodded my head like I was the smartest one. And the teacher would explain, and I was there confidently nodding my head up and down, even pretending to take notes. But when the day of the exam came, I got a glorious 1.3 and the teacher looked at me and said, "What's up, Manuel?" You were like a lizard in class, nodding and even writing things down. What happened to you? And with my dignity on the floor, I told him, "Teacher, I was just drawing little figures. I didn't understand a thing. Subscribe if you're breathing right now."
You didn't have to cut me off.
Once when I was 5 years old and in kindergarten, I decided to taste the classroom glue because I thought it tasted like vanilla. And I did it when no one was watching. I gave it a lick, then another, and it seemed like a heavenly treat to me. Until the teacher caught me and yelled, "Girls, stop eating glue." But it was already too late. I felt like little chef from Ratatouille was cooking for me and I said no. She took me to the bathroom to clean up and lectured me about not eating glue. I didn't care. Once back in class, I continued my culinary experiment. Once when I was in middle school, I had a friend we called the baby because the guy would pee himself every night and poop the bed while he slept. And every time he came to school, we would cover our noses when he walked by us because he didn't exactly smell nice, but he would say, "Why are you covering your noses? It's my essence." Until one day, a humble classmate bought him some adult diapers and gave them to him so he wouldn't come to school all dirty anymore. Oh my god, I'm pooping myself, it's coming out. Oh! Once when I was in high school, we did a project to make super sports cars out of cardboard, but when we finished, we put them in the backyard. But my friend, whom we called the macaco, saw it as an opportunity to take a dump in the projects without having to go to the bathroom. So one day when we went to get the cars to present them, we got to the backyard and went sniff, 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 and it smelled worse than my nephew's room in Bapen. But then we saw that macaco had come out of there with his pants down, and I was like, "Holy Mary, what is he doing?" And in the end, we realized the huge mess he had made. Sniff. Once, when I was in middle school, the strictest teacher expelled my friend Jorgito from school for slamming the door in his face because he was going to art class. But the teacher wasn't showing up and there were only 10 minutes left before class ended. So we started playing, pushing the door so no one could get in. Then, at that moment, Chuchito comes out and we shouted to Jorgito, "Push, push, don't let him in," and Jorgito with all his might was pushing as if he were defending the gates of heaven. But then we saw that Jorgito was losing and a face peeked in from outside the door. And it was the teacher, with crooked glasses and an angry bull's face, but Jorgito kept pushing with all his strength. And we yelled at him, abort mission," and then Jorgito looked up and when he saw the teacher's face, he even fainted. Push. Push? One time, my physics teacher, Mr. Neutrino, failed me because according to him, I didn't know how to add, but I swore my calculator was possessed. So I begged him to check my exam and he said, "If you find a mistake, I'll pass you." So I went to my buddy who always got straight A's, we checked everything, and my exam was deader than Michael Jackson. But then I had the great idea to change the name on my buddy's exam and put mine on it. So I went back all confident, smiling like Einstein, and Professor Neutrino looks at me really seriously, and without saying anything, he says, "Congratulations, Einstein." And I was happy until he handed me the paper and I saw it was a beautiful giant zero. Once when I was in middle school, I thought I had signed my academic death sentence because my buddy El Huevo swore to me that he had the leaked exam and that if I studied it, I would pass without a problem. So, feeling confident, I didn't crack open my notes once, but when the day of the exam came, I saw the questions and started sweating like a pig in a sauna because nothing matched. So I begged the teacher to help me out and he said, "Let the devil help you, kid, dummy." And in the end, my friend Huevos tells me, "Dude, you're not going to believe it, but that exam was from 3 years ago." And I was like, "No way." That day I discovered the true meaning of academic betrayal when it comes to studying. Once when I was in middle school, we almost evacuated the whole school because my buddy Camaron opened his lunch and a smell came out that seemed like a biological weapon. But the funniest thing is that right next to him was Professor Cabeza de Olmeca covering his sandwich and he almost fainted from the smell. But what happened is that Camaron Sin had kept his lunch next to his used gym socks. But the worst part is that half the class was already throwing up and the teacher totally freaked out, ran out with his little sandwich, and now my buddy is called Chernobyl Feet. I might be at school now since I couldn't attend in elementary school. I became the Girl Repellent 3000 because 2 girls from middle school were treating me like their toy and I just wanted to play pogs with my buddy El Panzas. But they would chase me around yelling, "Come here, little prince." And I, at 9 years old, was more scared than interested in flirting. I went to the principal, Miss Bristlehair, but she just said, "Oh, sweetie, enjoy life." And I didn't want to enjoy anything. I wanted to escape and ended up hiding in the bathrooms, but they found me, and at that moment, the spirit descended. Grandma Chona herself, with her rosary and legendary weapon mode, shouting, "No one touches my kids." Since that day, I've been an urban legend.